Let's take a look at how to digitize using the column 1 input method. Column 1s are a nice tool for digitizing where you can control the stitch direction as you digitize. I tend to think of using this tool like laying down railroad track, where you are digitizing with the ties. So one side of the tie, then the other, one side of the tie, then the other, and you will keep going in that fashion. So let's take a look at how to use that. So first I'm going to open a file. It's located in the graphics folder that's in your designs folder that's loaded with your software. And I'm going to go to columns.bmp. Now this is a good one for learning how to use the different types of column tools. And the column tool that we're looking at right now is column 1. If this is not what is showing up right here, you can click and hold for half a second and go to the flyout to grab column 1. So we're looking at the column 1 input method. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to leave all my tools, or pardon me, all of my properties as default right now. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to digitize these 3 pieces, and then we'll move on to some of the others. But to start, I'm going to go from the top down, and with the column 1, you start by digitizing the end. So you are creating pairs of points, and those pairs of points dictate your stitch direction. So I'm going to start with the end. I'm going to start here, 1. I'm going to hold Alt so it constrains to go to the other side. There's my other one, so I left click, and then I'm going to come all the way to the end, and I'm going to do it again. Left click, and I'm holding Alt to keep those lines constrained to 15 degrees. Then when I'm done, I hit enter and it creates my shape. Now this one's huge, so it's actually being a fill. But it's a random patternless fill that's meant to mimic the satin, and what's happening is it's adopting a fill because that stitch line is greater than 60 points. If we wanted to see it as a satin just to see it, we could change this to 0 to disable it, and now you're seeing it as this nice and shiny satin. Now this is, how wide is this? Oh yeah, this is really, really wide. Probably not such a great idea to do that as a satin. It would snag and pull out, so probably not so great. So the defaults were nice for that, so I'm going to go back in and turn those back on. Put that back to 60, hit apply, and OK. So again, let's do this one more time. I'm going to start with kind of the end of the shape. Here's one side, here's the other. So I did left then right, so I'm going to do it again. Left, then right, sides, not buttons. I'm always using the left button because they're always straight. All right, for a curve like this, I'm going to start on one end. And doesn't matter which end, you can digitize clockwise, counterclockwise, doesn't matter to you, or to me. Matters to you only in what's comfortable. I'm going to start this end, 1, 2, so I went inside, outside. I'm going to do it again, inside, but I'm going to right click to create a curve. I'm going to do the same thing up here. Right click to create a curve, come down here, left, and then I hit enter to complete the shape, and now I'm creating a satin stitch across that form as well. Now, let's select this. Let's take this underlay off for a minute so we can just see the stitches. I'm going to move this up here, and I'm going to do this again, and then I'm going to show you what a lot of new digitizers tend to do. They will go one side then the other, and then for some reason they'll bow tie it and they'll swap their directions, and then they'll come back and do it the other way, and this is really not going to work. So if you start on one side, it's one side then the other, one side then the other. If you swap those points in the middle, it will start to bow tie, and this is not going to sew out well and is probably not going to look like you meant it to look. The other thing that a lot of new digitizers will do is they'll try to use more points than necessary. So I did this in 3 sets. So one on the end, one in the middle, one on the end. What you'll often see happen is they'll try to use a few more, and what's funny is they'll follow that curve, but then they'll start to kind of help the curve along a little bit, and then they'll end it. And with the column 1, those lines between the points that you see are dictating stitch direction. So when I hit enter, you'll notice I'm getting some very, very strange stitches. And let's take the underlay off so you can just see the stitches. And that is not going to end well. I've got really bunched up stitches here. I've got some short stitches here. You can fix that by deleting those and then moving this point. I'm going to hold Control, because right now those handles are going with it and they're staying. If I hold Control, it will arc out perfectly. When you're dealing with curves like this, typically I want to think about the stitches on a curve like the spokes on a bicycle. I've said this before, and this too is where I will take a piece of paper and I will draw hash marks across and kind of divide it up so they're all kind of pointing down here. You can see the ends kind of do it too. You'd see it better if I could actually draw along that line. But you kind of get the idea. Get back out of here. So with something like this, it's kind of the same thing, one side, then the other. So I'm starting with the end with a left click. Here's a right click, because it's a curve. Here is a straight, because it's left click. So I can have it start out narrower and end wider. Now here, I did struggle a little bit. This top one didn't line up exactly. You can edit that later if you would like, and you can do that just by honestly clicking on the line and moving it. That's kind of a nice trick. Instead of trying to deal with the handles, you can move the line itself. Or you could have put in more points as you were doing it to have it follow that curve. I'm a fan of fewer points because it makes it easier to edit. However, if I can digitize it and not edit it later, I will consider that as well. All right, so let's come down here and let's look at this S for a second. So with the S, we've got some transitions. And again, it would be very common for me to print this out and then draw across it, especially when I was starting out. I don't do it nearly as much anymore unless I have a very complex design. And then I might divide this in thirds or in quarters. I try not to exceed 180 degrees. This, because I got my hash mark wrong, is a little bit off. So let's go back and do this in quarters. So halfway between there is there, halfway between there is there. This top bit, I'm pretty close, so let's see if I can actually do this or if I'm going to make a mess. So I will start on the inside over here, come across. So left click to make straight ends, and then right click, and I'm going across the form, right, across the form, coming down. Here I'm going to have a sharp transition, so I'm going to left click to make that transition from the curve to the straight, 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 curve, curve, and don't stress about this being a straight line. It won't curve out until the next point. Curve, 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 straight, straight, hit enter, and I've just completed that form with a column 1. All right, so what about something like this? Oh, I still have my lines on there. Let's clear those off. Keep doing that. All right, so what about something like this? Can we do this with a column 1? Yes. Does it hurt my head? Yes. Do I recommend that you do it? No. Because we have to do everything in pairs of points, I would have to consider doing this one, then the other, And for every change, I would have to put in a pair of points. And that just does not seem like fun. Although one thing you should notice is that my pairs of points do not have to be the same. I can have a straight point on one side and a curve on the other. But this is just super not fun. And it's probably as painful for you to watch as it is for me to do, so I'm going to end it here. And even that, I'm not loving it. For something with the sides like this where they're completely uneven, this is definitely something I would consider a column 2 for. Or if you wanted even a complex fill tool where you set the stitch type to whatever you want. So we have column 1 and column 2 and complex fill tools, and it used to be very much that the stitch type was tied to the tool. And so that's why we would choose one tool or the other. Now that is very much not the case. Stitch types are pretty much, you can put a fill into a column or a satin into a complex fill tool. So that is very much not the case. It's kind of user preference. And for me, what tool I use is almost a little bit of habit because it's what I used when it did matter, stitch type to input tool type. So that's why, honestly, I choose a lot of the tools I do is just left over in habit. Find a tool that you like and use the one that works for you. All right, so this one I would not do with a column 1 just because it's a lot of work and it's not going to end up as well as it would with a column 2 or a complex fill. Now let's look at these two. So column tools are the tools that I typically choose for digitizing lettering. Again, that's a good chunk of leftover. You can use a complex fill tool if you want. Just set it to a satin to get that nice rounded effect, or you can leave it a fill if that's what you want. But it's definitely habit for me. But here's what I want you to think about is how do I do something like this? I can't do it all in one piece. So how do I divide it? So I'm going to use a vector line to divide it, just so that we can see, and it moves with the artwork as opposed to my markup tool that does not. You would typically do the middle and then the outside of the E. So I might consider a division right there. And same thing with the A. You would typically have the crossbar separated from the legs. And then how you choose to handle this cap or this end, there's a few different ways to do it. So let's look at how to do this. Another thing you want to consider is where do you want to start, where do you want to end? So do I want to start on the bottom? Do I want to end on the bottom? Do I want to start in the middle? Just kind of keep that in mind. Since I don't have anything I'm really super worried about right now, I'm just going to start on the bottom and end in the middle with this. So I'm going to come start on the end, left click, and I'm going to come all the way over, and I'm going to make that transition, and I'm going to come all the way up, make that transition, and come to the end. Hit enter. So I just made this piece. Now, a couple problems with what I did. One, if I just create this middle piece now, it's going to create a trim because it's ending here, and then I need to start down here. So I don't want to do that. I want to do it without a trim. How do I do that? Well, I would typically move my exit point to generate a travel stitch. So now when it sews, it'll sew one way, travel up, and sew back down. So that's definitely one thing you want to consider is your travel stitches. Now, before the ability to move entry and exit points, we would digitize a column and do half a piece and then travel up with a walk stitch and digitize half a piece to come back down. That's not as necessary anymore. I have friends that do it. I still catch myself doing it out of habit, but it's not necessarily something you have to do. You can move your exit point and it will generate a travel stitch for you. Now, here's something else that we need to look at. So in the design, we have stitches kind of going across right here, and then we have another piece that comes back. You may want to bump this out just a touch. So I'm going to add another piece right here and just bring this up just a touch to have it have a little bit more of an overlap. And then I will meet back up with myself, do the end, and then come back. And so it will push a little bit. I'm going to stop just shy, otherwise I can push into my stitching and that will cause perpendicular stitches to be pull gaps. So when you're sewing on top, I have my E that's coming this way, and then I have the other pieces that are coming this way, and they come back and they'll start to pull a little bit of a gap. So I want it to just meet up and then have it so that the little bump in the E is actually just slightly covered up by that satin stitch. So that's what I'm looking to do here. Now, one more thing that I just did, I started over here. I need to generate a travel stitch, so I'm just going to move this over I'm going to move my entry point over the last stitch of my previous element. So now it's going to sew without trimming. And we just made an E, so that'll work well. Now let's look at the A and how to deal with the A. Again, different ways you can deal with it. Do you want to do the crossbar first or last? And how do you want to deal with the top? So let's start with an end. And then we'll deal with this transition here. And this transition here. And then we'll come down and finish this up. There we go. So that's one way to handle it. And then you could move your exit point kind of up here. You could add a few points to kind of bump this out so that you can then sew across the other way. And then we would do one piece here to here, here to here to create that crossbar. So that's one way to do it. Look at your stitches, see if that's something that you want to do. You may want to sew this out. Another thing that we could choose to do, or in a different kind of direction for it, would be to overlap these top pieces or create a cap, and that would all depend on the size. You could choose to come up, not that way. That's what happens when you don't pay attention to what you're doing. And we'll come here, and then come in a little bit, and come up. And then for the next piece, we'll come down. Now it's going to leave a little bit of a gap. So what we may choose to do is something like this. Make the end first. Come down. And then we're going to put these really close together. That might cause a little bit of a stitch bump. So we might have to do those in two pieces. But I think we're doing okay right now. That looks all right. And then, again, deal with that little bit of a bump, if that was what you wanted to do, and then throw in that crossbar. Let's bring that out. Sorry, I'm not on a line and I keep trying to right click. There we go. Come out. And then we will move that exit point up so that we have somewhere to go. And do that crossbar. I'm holding Alt to keep that crossbar perfectly level. All right, so that's another way to deal with it. Okay, so two different approaches to doing that A. And there's more. You could cap the whole top. There's a ton of different ways to deal with it. But those are kind of going to be your big ways to use a column 1. Something like this, where it goes thick, thin, thick, thin, thick, thin. Again, can you do it with a column 1? Yes. Is it a little bit easier to use a column 2? Maybe. Is it easier to use a complex fill? Probably. So find the tools that work for you. But if you want to dictate your stitch direction as you're digitizing and perhaps save yourself a little bit of time, that's what column 1 is really, really good at, is, again, creating elements with pairs of points, and you are dictating stitch direction as you digitize.